this evening. I think everyone's in, right? Yeah, I think we're okay. I wanted to hang on just to make sure that any kind of Zoom issues that people might have logging in, we've allowed enough time for that, but I think that's fine now, as long as everyone's happy. Let's get started. So, yes, thank you so much everyone for joining us for this special event that we've organised at the University of Portsmouth for Fashion Revolution Week. This discussion is being recorded and we will make the recording available as soon as we can after the event. So Fashion Revolution Week is an annual event now in its 9th year, and it was created to commemorate the Rana Plaza factory collapse, which happened in 2013. It killed 1,134 people in Bangladesh. So really, to make sure that we never forget that this happened and that we continue to push the mainstream fashion industry to do things better, because currently this fashion industry is built upon the exploitation of labor and natural resources, and wealth and power are concentrated in the hands of the few, and growth and profit are rewarded above all else by this current system. So we know that big brands and retailers are producing too much, too fast, and there is an element of manipulation in terms of us getting into this kind of cycle of overconsumption. Now, on the other hand, we have the majority of people that are actually making our clothes that are not paid enough to meet their basic needs, and they're already feeling the impact of the climate crisis, which the fashion industry is fueling. So as global citizens, we all have the power to take action. And so this Fashion Revolution Week, we hope we can all join together in reimagining a just and equitable fashion system for people and the planet. So in this panel discussion, we will be exploring one question specifically to get us started. And that question is, what are the regenerative, restorative, and revolutionary new fashion systems? So today's discussion will be moderated by myself, Nadine Kamasani, and Dr. Lara Torres. We both teach here at the University of Portsmouth on the BA Fashion and Textiles course. And we really want to encourage and invite all of you to post your questions in the chat as we go along today, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. So without further ado, let's begin. So I would like to start by asking Dr. Sass Brown to tell us from her perspective, what are the regenerative, restorative, and revolutionary new fashion systems?
Sure. Well, thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to be here and nice to have fellow panel members too online. So I know you wanted us to start with sort of some general sort of background and context of who we are and how we got here. So effectively, I consider myself pretty much a writer, an educator, and a researcher on ethical fashion. It's a topic that I've concentrated on for almost 20 years at this stage, which seems like an incredibly long time, but nevertheless, such as it is. And that's most of the time that I've been working in academia. So in that time, I've published a couple of books, also ancient tomes at this stage. The first one, Eco Fashion, was published back in 2010. So, you know, more than 10 years ago now. And the follow-up, Refashioned, which was specifically on designers working with upcycled materials, was followed 3 years later. And that book really just came out of the fact that there were so many great designers that I wanted to talk about and feature around the world that were working with recycled, upcycled, pre and post consumer wasted materials generally. The first book that came out in 2010, I published that simultaneously with my website at the time, which was Eco Fashion Talk. And the whole point of both of those undertakings was really to talk and to honor all the really great ethical design solutions that there were around the world, because particularly at that time, most of it was happening in the emerging design space. It was happening by small designers that were working away in their various geographies around the world, many of whom had no idea what was happening and who else was doing what in the other geographies around the world. So much of it was just very specific and very isolated. So I've had the luck, I guess, of traveling considerably over my life. And so a lot of my knowledge is very globally based. And so I wanted to connect those dots and share just the really great work that designers were undertaking around the world, and to show that this was a global movement. It wasn't a local movement, and that we were all working together as a global community towards better solutions. So that was the point behind both the book and the website, was really just to honor, to share, to connect great design solutions. So my background is actually as a designer. I've started out as a designer many moons ago and transitioned into education about that same time point, about 20 years ago, when I started initially teaching at FIT in New York. And I started while I was still working in the industry for mainstream brands, high street brands, initially actually fast fashion originally, but then higher end big brands. And I started teaching at FIT, just a single course. And as often happens, although this wasn't an intention, I ended up transitioning full-time to teaching and leaving the industry, which I got really disheartened by the commercial aspect of production. And so it was just a good juncture for me. So I went the not unusual route of teaching part-time, then teaching full-time, going through a myriad of different positions at Fashion Institute of Technology. And so part of that time I spent in Italy. I was 4 years as the resident director of the FIT's program in Florence in Italy, and came back to the New York campus to go into an administrative role as assistant dean, associate dean, and then dean for the School of Art and Design, which the fashion department lives under amongst another 16 different art and design departments. And I was there for 18 years in total when I decided it was time for a change, because I did not want to continue up that academic ladder and get into more administrative positions. And I left to move to Dubai, and took a couple of years and worked for, was the founding dean at the Dubai Institute of Design and Innovation there. And so that was a cross-disciplinary university that doesn't teach a single design discipline, it teaches across design disciplines. And so it was in collaboration with Parsons, the New School, and with MIT. And so I was there for a couple of years and actually walked away from that position to complete my PhD, which was floundering at the time. Came back to the UK, first time in 30 years I've lived here. So moved back, completed my PhD, and I'm now back working, advising, teaching, speaking, etc., etc. So my PhD was on sustainable business and operational models in the craft sector. A lot of my background is working in or working with women's cooperatives, particularly in the developing world, and specifically in places like Brazil. A lot of my time was spent there working with one of the foremost women's cooperatives, really historically speaking, which is Copa Haka, that works in Rocinha, the largest favela in all South America, not just Brazil. And so a lot of my background is based on a love of materials and a love of craftsmanship and a love of artisanship. So a lot of my time has been devoted to working with cooperatives, often women's cooperatives, particularly in the developing world. And so I've written coursework on that topic. I teach a program at Politecnico di Milano for their master's design students on how to work ethically with global artisanship, because too often designers try and put, or product developers try and put artisans in the supply chain, and they just don't fit ethically or well. It's not a place they should be. I teach and have written programs for, continue to teach, and programs at FIT, which for, what's the program there? Design for Social Impact and Fashion Activism. And I just completed writing and getting through accreditation, a new MA at Kingston University, London, which is on sustainable business, fashion and practices. So it's about alternative methodologies in fashion with a mission-driven or not-for-profit, but different solutions about having an impact, a tangible impact. It's not a theoretical program, but it's also not producing product. It's not producing more stuff, if you like. So when it comes to, I also, I should say, advise in the industry. So I just recently did some work for Gap Incorporated, all of their brands. So Athleta, Old Navy, Banana Republic, Gap, etc., where they have a program, an accelerator program for their design teams around the world. And I recently did some advising for them on cultural appropriation, on diversity and inclusion. And I'm about to teach a masterclass for the Ethical Fashion Initiative, which is flagship program of the United Nations. They have an accelerator program where they support the development of predominantly African designers in becoming international labels. So I'm teaching the masterclass for them as well in the next little while. So as it pertains to the question, regenerative, restorative, and revolutionary fashion systems, I think because my love of fashion is based very much in a love of textiles and craftsmanship, and it's led me to work significantly with artisanship and social impact around the retention of material culture. You know, my focus has very much been around, whether writing, speaking, whatever, on impacts and responses. So for me, regenerative and restorative is about restoring traditional material culture and the special considerations that you have to have when working with global artisanship, whether it's ethical, social, cultural, or even the spiritual significance of the codes that are embedded within those materials and those histories and those cultures. As I said, you can't simply just think it might be nice to work with artisans and slot them into the supply chain. So I guess the other component that I do speak about and write about on occasion is regenerative agriculture, particularly as it pertains to, say, fiber shed. So small localized geographies of communities that go from earth to dirt within the supply chain of product development, not fashion specific, but often it's obviously it's fiber shed. The name says it's about fibers and materials. So those would be my responses to regenerative and restorative, in my case, focused around the regeneration and the restoration of traditional craft, which is sadly being lost in so many geographies around the world. I think that's probably about it. I'm sure I've done my 5 minutes.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that lovely introduction. I think we'll move on to Belle Jacobs, who is a former fashion editor, climate and animal rights campaigner. And I will invite you, Belle, to introduce yourself and also perhaps give us a small introduction or response to our provocative question.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me on this panel. Sass, what an incredible CV. I'm so inspired and really would love to talk to you after this panel. I am, like Dr. Tora said, Lara said, I am a former fashion editor for a mainstream newspaper. This was between 1999 and 2014. And I was deep in sort of the whole fast fashion system, really. That was what I wrote about, that was what I promoted. it really essentially taught me that most fashion journalism, definitely at that time, was a form of selling. Um, and during the time I was there, I noticed that the pace of fashion accelerated hugely. It became sort of really by sort of the mid 2000s, a stream of materials would cross my desk, a stream of press releases, a stream of product. It was really speeding up. Dare I say it, this was actually the heyday. I'm hoping everything is starting to change now, but it was sort of a huge crescendo of product. The turning point, I often talk about it, is Rana Plaza. Here we are on Fashion Revolution week. Rana Plaza was the opening of a huge can of worms, not just for me, but for a lot of people in the industry, when we started asking very serious questions about some of the products that we were promoting on our pages. Before that, we really hadn't been asking enough questions, I think. We were trying, I was trying to promote the odds ethical label where I could, but I had no idea the depth of inequity and environmental degradation and human exploitation that underpins the existing fashion structure today, the industrial fashion structure. So it took me about a year after the fall of Rana Plaza to sort of pull myself together and understand this full impact that I'm talking about. And then I left to focus on sustainable fashion, which I felt were the labels that could offer alternatives to sort of the industrialized practice that I'm talking about. But also pretty much at the same time, I started to get into climate activism. And once you start to become aware of the emergency that this planet is in, it's very difficult to shut that down in any way. It's actually, and anyone here who is sort of following the progress of reports from the IPCC on the climate emergency will know that we are really now, really at the limit of time that we have to take real action. And even if we take action now, some of these changes are locked in. We are locked into a period of planetary instability. So sometimes when I see these, not this panel, I have to say, but other panels, there's still this desire to kind of try and maintain the status quo. The phrase I find very frightening is get back to normality. That normality is over. The fashion system that we see today was built in a time of relative stability. That stability is over, and we now have to look at different systems, different structures. And I think even more, we have to ask ourselves, what does fashion mean for us in a climate emergency? What will it represent for us? It's going to be very difficult to absolutely pin that down. We have never been in a situation like this before as a human race, and definitely not as a fashion industry. We have to think about this industry now, which is built mainly on producing non-essentials on a finite planet. Arguably, none of us need any more clothes. Definitely not in the richer countries, I have to say. What the climate did for me is I joined Extinction Rebellion. I joined the Extinction Rebellion fashion teams, and I ran 2 campaigns with them. One campaign was called Boycott Fashion, where we were asking people to stop buying all new fashion, which at the time, 2019, seemed quite radical. We got a lot of backlash. Our second campaign was to cancel London Fashion Week. And the reasoning behind that, excuse my voice, I do have a cold. The reasoning behind that was that London Fashion Week was a showcase for accelerated fashion. Every fashion week, every fashion month, regardless of the fact that we were flying journalists around the world, and that was having a massive carbon footprint. But each fashion week sort of promotes the new and therefore disregards the old. So these are both sort of viewpoints that I still hold to massively. I think any new fashion system now has to be in service to the planet. And I would say all of us have to be in service to the planet. But any new fashion system that we have going forward needs to be in service to the planet. And I think in those fashion systems, the clothes will be not the most important thing. They're almost the end product, and everything that comes before them is the key thing. How we're paying the workers, how we're treating the earth, where we're getting the resources from, what is our carbon footprint. These are the things that matter, and what comes out at the end, not so key for me. going back to this idea of transition, we are between worlds now. And it means that the answers are not going to be clear, but the time for creative innovation is unparalleled. And so in a way, we have a license now to think outside all boxes that we ever imagined, even the ones that we're not aware of. We need to reach out beyond them. I'll finish there just because my voice is going. Sorry, Dr. Lara.
Thank you so much, Belle. That was so wonderful. I think you've given us all a lot to think about. So yeah, I want to keep encouraging everyone listening in. I've seen a few people writing in the chat, so keep going, and any questions you think of, please keep adding them. And Belle, I just love that idea of a fashion system in service to the planet. I think that's just really fascinating to hold that. So I think we're going to move now to our third panelist. Berta is Head of Digital Sustainability and Social Justice at The Dematerialized, and is also a fashion educator. She's joining us today, I think, from Paris, still in Paris. So I'd like to hand over to you, and yeah, I'd lovely to hear about you and your background, and then also again invite you to answer our question, which is, what are the regenerative, restorative and revolutionary new fashion systems?
Yeah, thank you so much, Noreen. First of all, thank you for the invitation, Lara, Noreen. It's, I'm quite humbled to be here with such legends. So it's really, really an amazing, amazing privilege for me. So thank you for that. My name is Beth Aviczyk. I am the founder of Unfolding Strategies, and Unfolding Strategies is an outcome of my 10 years in fashion education, and before that, 5 years in fashion industry and art world. It's a fashion consultancy, and we call it also an education lab. So Unfolding Strategies is basically an outcome of what I was doing in fashion education. I was teaching many courses and supervising MA thesis and BA thesis projects on fashion ethics, critical thinking about fashion, and all those other expansions and iterations of how we can say those things. I was particularly heavily involved for last years with the MA Sustainability in Fashion Creative Industries program, which was first at ESMOD Berlin, and now it's at AMD Berlin. So I think it's quite relevant to our conversation. And as Noreen mentioned, I'm also head of sustainability and social impact at NFT marketplace, The Dematerialized. And today I'm going to be speaking actually more about digital fashion, because I think this is a part of the, this could be my quite unique contribution to the conversation. There are not many sustainability officers or heads of sustainability and social impact in digital fashion, because it's still a very small fraction of fashion industry. So I will be talking about that. I came into fashion education because I felt that fashion industry, where I work as a creative director and stylist, is harmful, is bad, is extremely unsustainable. The same with art world. You create an exhibition, then you destroy everything. And it's the early stages of social media, so even focus on photographing it wasn't so massive. So this is kind of where I'm coming from. I'm still a student myself, as I'm doing my PhD, and I studied many different things such as social psychology and curating, but I never before my PhD studied fashion. So my PhD is in fashion studies, so hopefully I will complete it soon, and it's about fashion knowledge in times of the digital. So I'm very interested in what is fashion education, what is fashion knowledge, how do we reproduce it, what does it really mean? And I also have a podcast which is called Fashion Knowledge that talks exactly about those topics, where I invite different educators, fashion practitioners to talk about it. So maybe I will tell you a little bit about my work with Dematerialized, and actually more like active parts of it, what we're trying to develop to do, and how we're trying to, tackle or maybe relate to those three big R words that are included in the question, which are regenerative, restorative, and last one is revolutionary. Before it was radical, but it's revolutionary. So in my last, 5 years of work, every time I'm asked to define what is fashion, I usually say it's a complex ecosystem which produces objects, meanings, experiences, and values. And it kind of always shows this very active, vital, this very entangled system as it is. So I already think about it in the way that kind of the question proposes it. And this quite rapid expansion towards digital fashion, it adds even more layers to the system. It makes it even more rhizomatic structure because it brings in new technologies such as AI and blockchain. It brings new form of labor, either automated production or digital labor, because I think this is a next big question mark for digital fashion. And I will talk a little bit in a second about it. And also it brings new digital products and experiences. So in my work and why I joined a NFT marketplace that is dedicated to digital fashion is because I think this is an interesting opportunity to rethink how we do fashion in this kind of new expanding field, because I think there's no way to escape, and I don't think it's a fad, and I really believe that digitization in fashion will be progressing. So it's the question now, how can we do it differently? As we studied, some of us for 10 years, other for 20 years, how harmful fashion is, and what are all the unfair and socially injustice elements of it, and what do we do with that knowledge and how we act on it. So I spent many hours discussing those things with my students, but actually taking action towards it is, I think it's very exciting to me, and I think it's necessary. And I would urge also many people to actually try to do it with whatever means they have. For me, the opportunity is that I'm doing it through my agency, consultancy, unfolding strategies, and I also do it with the Dematerialize. So the question is, how we can deliver on those big claims, because digital fashion also says that it's going to decentralize fashion, that it's transparent. So how can we work around it, and what does it really mean? Especially in times when there is a lack of data. There's a lot of research that needs to be done around digital fashion, and particularly sustainability and ethics. And this is still in the making. I'm hoping that the next 2-3 years will bring really, really a lot of that. And we recently published a manifesto with the Dematerialize that kind of shows in which direction we want to go, which areas of focus are important to us. But I think sorry, I'm just lurking at my notes. I think it's important, if we're focusing on those questions about regenerative system, restorative systems, to kind of focus maybe on 3 of them. Also, we have 7 minutes, so I think that's about as much as I can squeeze in. So when I think about regenerative design, I think it's immediately about indigenous cultures, and maybe this is not a common mix to think about native fashion and indigenous culture in context of digital fashion, but I think this is something that's very necessary. So we are currently having a project, a knowledge exchange project with CIDIM. It's a school in Mexico City. We are working for 10 months with a group of 12 fashion, animation, and digital design students. And this is what they're doing. They're thinking how we can focus on cultural sustainability, how we can, shift focus from brands as partners, and the ones who are entering Web3 or Metaverse, to actual communities, and how to bring culture and heritage, how we can combine it, this thinking about future and this emerging future that we're already in now, and how we can co-create with them those digital fashion. So this is something that I'm very passionate about, and we will only have an outcome of this project in October this year. So I hope we'll be able to share it with you, but I'm quite optimistic. And I think this idea of, co-creating with a community and thinking how we can preserve heritage and culture, it also should be at the interests of, I don't know, even luxury fashion, because how luxury fashion houses will deliver and bring in their heritage once the all new, exciting, fresh, innovative ideas are kind of, running out. So how remember that digital fashion also kind of stems from fashion as it is today, and is also my mirror many things. Then when I think about the word restorative, I think, what we can do not to mirror the mistakes. And one of the things that blockchain is very often positively associated with as a technology is transparency. But we can see now that whenever we buy a digital fashion, either if it's an NFT or if it's not an NFT, however we kind of try to purchase it and own it, there's a lack of information, there's lack of data. Who made our digital clothes, to kind of, to repeat the question. So what we are working on now, and hopefully launching within a month, it's called Real, because we believe digital fashion is real, and it has also real issues and real carbon footprint and real people behind it. We're launching the Digital Fashion Labor Transparency Standard. So we want to also encourage other people in digital fashion community, other creators, other NFT marketplaces to actually disclose information, who made the garments, where they were made, also in what kind of time frame, because all this information is very important if we want to, really deliver on the transparency promise of digital fashion. And if we also think about digital fashion being exactly in the middle between fashion industry and tech, the questions of labor in both are very, very important, because there's a lot of invisible labor going in digital industries. So this is very, very important to us. And then if I think about the revolutionary Web3 in general, we could say that everything around, Web3 and fashion entering Web3 is revolutionary because it focuses on the creators and the creators economy, because it expands the notion of what is a garment, what are clothes. We can now see this almost ontological shift that we consider a pixelated image of a garment itself. So this is already a material for amazing PhD thesis on its own. And on the other hand, it also reimagines the bodies. Like, what does it mean to own garments and to wear them and to experience them? But tomorrow we are actually launching a partnership with a fintech that's built on circular economy principles. And the idea of this partnership is that people will be able to get their old clothes in exchange for digital garments. So in that sense, it's contributing to the circular economy principles around circulation of products and elimination of waste. Obviously, we can ask what's happening and what's going to happen in future with all those NFTs and digital fashion assets. I think this is a very important question, and I think we need to really address what is even the product life cycle of digital fashion NFT. There are some very interesting researchers working on that, so we are hoping to collaborate with them too. And I also wanted to say that one of the things that's revolutionary is that we can have a conversation about those things on the level that was not possible before. So if anybody has any critique, feedback, or would like to contribute to those conversations, I would like to invite them to our Discord and share their feedback with us. We have the section on the dematerialized Discord, which is called Growing Together, and it's intended for feedback, comments, critique, whatever, because I think that that kind of transparency and exchange is also very important. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. That was super, super interesting. And I think that you probably already started answering a question that I had for you. So I think it's really good because I think we are sharing the same concern. So in my own research and in my PhD, dematerialized practices were at the center of it, and they were part of sort of my direction, coming from a background also as a fashion designer and moving into academia as a researcher, and moving away from producing physical items and starting to work with digital films as a sort of alternative route. And that was always one of my big concerns, was this notion of dematerialization, in the sense that it's kind of an inaccurate term, in a way that it's hinting of something sort of ceasing to be material, but that's not completely true, because both in digital fashion and fashion film, there is a material aspect to it. So my question to you was a bit around this idea of how the cloud is usually considered something kind of almost supernatural, with supernatural qualities. It's the cloud is sort of surrounded by this idea of magic, as if it doesn't have a physicality. But there is, as we know, as you just mentioned, there is a very physical aspect to it. So there is a massive infrastructure behind it. There is digital labor, there is energy, there is technology obsolescence that's connected to all of these devices that we are using and we need to feed. So that was something that I'm really interested in discussing, is how do you see the environmental impact of digital fashion? So yeah, that would be my opening question to you.
Yeah, sure. Happy to continue. Well, thank you for all those comments. I think this is very important. So in terms of environmental impact of digital fashion, there's a lot of amazing and inspiring claims saying that if we compare one digital garment to one physical garment, one is much more sustainable than the other. And this is great, but I think we have to ask a question: why do we start this comparison? As we don't compare playing football on the field to computer game. We don't compare, I don't know, we just don't do that in other instances. So I think this very powerful and amazing for imagination comparison led to many radical claims around digital fashion by default being sustainable. And this is also linked to thinking, which indicates that consumer behavior will shift in a sudden direction, which is, I will buy more digital clothes, therefore I will buy less physical garments. Only time will show if this is something that's realistic. Definitely, there's a lot of data that there are already people engaging and owning or exchanging in, for example, gaming environment and buying those digital garments. But will it be linked to other kind of consumer behaviors? We don't know. So that's one thing that's important, and that's why I think we need a lot of research, that we need a lot of work in this space. And I'm also hoping that academic field will step in quite rapidly, and I hope there will be research projects. One of the people who's a fascinating researcher who's very interested in product life cycle of digital fashion NFTs is Elizabeth Bigger, and she comes from a background of parametric design and fashion, and I really admire her work, and I'm really looking forward to discussing those things with her more. We will be recording a podcast, I think, in the next 2 weeks, so I'm very curious what she has to say, and I think it will be more open to the public. Then another thing is obviously not all digital fashion is blockchain specific, not all digital fashion is NFTs. So we can also think, what is the carbon footprint of Instagram filters? We can think, what is also the carbon footprint of, I don't know, the garments that get photoshopped on our photos. And then lastly, the one associated with NFTs, which are very, obviously, NFTs exist only on blockchain. So this is also a question, what kind of blockchain it is? And it's very important because certain blockchain are very energy consumption heavy and others are not. So the difference is between proof of work or proof of stake. And once the blockchain is proof of stake, is not, as it's obviously nothing has zero energy consumption, but it's over 90% less energy consumption. So in that sense, it's very important to also, and I think role of places like the Dematerialize or any other also digital fashion design houses, because now we have a lot of morphs. We don't know if it's a platform, is it the designer, is it a fashion house? So I think it's quite important that we are educated. Sorry, I'm reading a question as I'm reading, so I'm going to hide it because I get distracted. I'm sorry. It's a long question. So I think this is another aspect that's very important. And we really need numbers and we really need data, and we need to have substantial kind of ways of calculating and to say, these are the numbers, and then think how we can reduce it. And then we can lastly think how we can offset it. And lastly, the very interesting space, I'm sorry, it's because it's a very complex open question. So the last thing that is quite interesting is also a question of setting, which is always a difficult matter at the Dematerialized. We used to follow the one NFT, one tree logic before, but I'm looking forward to exploring more on-chain possibilities and understanding and learning more about them and thinking about this direction. So I think it's a very, very broad question. Maybe I gave a too detailed answer, but I think there's, first of all, a lot of amazing ideas about digital fashion. There's also a lot of very either hyper optimistic or hyper dramatic approaches to it. And I think we need data, we need numbers, and we need to think clearly what it actually offers and what it can be and how it can be used, because it's also a very early stage. So it's also a question what digital fashion is becoming, not only what it is yet, because yet now it's very early stages. So I think this is why it's so important to think about digital fashion ethics, about sustainability in this context, because it's a new unexplored terrain, and it might mirror everything that we know that is not working right now.
That's great, Beata. Thank you so much. I feel like there is so much to unpack, especially as from all three of you panelists. We've had such different perspectives and such different approaches. So there's a lot to cover. So actually, Elaine Igo, who's a colleague from the University of Portsmouth, has posted a really interesting question here. So I'm going to just read that out. So wondering how to connect Sass's comment on the fact that you can't slot an artisan into a supply chain with Beata's knowledge on digital fashion. Where are the equivalents of artisans and mass production, and what implications are there on the carbon footprint and consumption practices of digital fashion?
Right, I don't know where to start with that. I'm sure Beata can input particularly the component about carbon footprint and consumption practices. I mean, as far as when we're talking about artisanship and craftsmanship, there is certainly a place for technology and technological advancement when it's used sensitively and carefully, and isn't a complete intervention and replacement of tradition. So there are a lot of different fields of thought and a lot of disagreement in the retention, reinvention of tradition and material culture, about whether from a puritanical perspective of not messing at all with the history, the context, the processes, the materials, etc., as opposed to reinventing it, reconsidering it. My PhD was based actually on a diversity of different models of different types of interventions, and what the ethical implications of those interventions were. Part of the failing, I think, of academia is it often studies content without actually passing judgment. It's considered not to be our place to pass judgment. It's our place to research and document. And I quite disagree with that, because I think when we're talking about tradition and heritage and culture, and people and community and place, there is an enormous role for ethics to play in that, and the careful consideration of ethics, our own biases, etc., in those conversations. None of which really answers the question about the combination of digital fashion and artisanship, but as such as it is, I think I maybe answered a little bit of that question.
Should I try to even add something to it?
If you have something, why not?
I would only say that we shouldn't only invite to the digital fashion, to Web3 big brands or digital native creators. I think we need to disrupt that. I think if this is about disruption, we need to also think about the past, how we can preserve the past and how we can learn from it. And for me, it's more about the transmission of values and certain ways of thinking, and actually, working through things together. And I know there are many difficult, those kind of projects and partnerships are always very difficult, and almost most of them that I've seen are kind of doomed to fail, but I still think it's an important conversation, because we cannot just only go to the future, that's because I think we just need to learn from the past as well. So I think we need to embrace the both. So for me, that is important. But how, so I don't know how to answer on the artisan and craft element. For me, it's more even about the way of thinking and approaching things, and how they could be approached by other communities, not necessarily the ones who are in fashion industry or in tech specifically.
That's great. Thank you so much, Beata. I'd actually just like to take a moment to come back to Belle's perspective and what she talked about, which I thought was fascinating, in terms of calling for this cancelling of Fashion Week, this kind of creating a stop, because obviously, in a way, the last couple of years, we've lived through that kind of global pause during the pandemic. So I was hoping that kind of global pause was going to give us all a chance to rethink and to make dramatic changes. But actually, there seems to be this acceleration happening. And there was a comment in here from Zoe Gilbertson about how fast fashion seems to be worse than ever. Shane, obviously that's been in the press recently, kind of out of control. So Belle, I'd love to just ask you, building on what you talked about sort of around sort of this cancellation of Fashion Week, but I wonder, like, on a really practical level, what are the kinds of ways in which you hope that people could engage with fashion outside of the fast fashion system?
Yeah, you're right. I shared some of that, Noura, and I remember being in the pandemic or in lockdown thinking, is this the time that we reset? Is this the time that we think about what's really important to us? And for a while, it did feel like that, didn't it? It felt like this could be the new beginning. I think the human need to claw back to, like I said, the normality of consumption that has been so sort of aggressively promoted to us for the last sort of 50 to 100 years is strong. I don't know how you counter that. Sorry, Nurin. It's. I think on the positive side, I do see. I have a lot of people within my community who have, in inverted commas, woken up and are thinking much more carefully about things. And then yes, we've got the flip side where Shein is now doing incredibly well, and it's becoming the most powerful fashion company in the world. I don't, my whole life now seems to be about trying to raise awareness of the processes, the true facts of the fashion industry. And I do a lot of sort of what I call unveiling, but it's more than that. It's sort of, you really are lifting the curtain on the inequities. There's a stat I just sometimes wish I could jolt people awake to the realities. And there's a stat that I give up sometimes, which is the Oxfam report saying, it takes a fashion CEO 4 days to earn what a garment worker makes in her lifetime. And that is the degree of inequity that we're looking at in this industry. While I am interested in the phenomenon of digital fashion, I'm also much more, I think this is partly a generational thing, Beata, so sorry, but I want us to really reconnect with the material. Yeah, so I really want us to think about where our fibers are coming from, and almost to envisage the land in which the cotton is grown, to sort of reconnect with the I think part of our problems today is our fundamental disconnection, not only with the processes behind the things that we consume, from our pens to our phones to our clothes, but with nature herself. That, I think, is the underlying issue here. And so for me, if we can connect people to the world more closely through a tactile intervention with their clothing, so that I really think about the cotton, do you know what I mean? I think that for me would be key to the future. And it's really interesting what Sass was saying about sort of indigenous crafts, and what Beata was saying. In a group I founded called Fashion Act Now, which is calling for degrowth in the fashion industry on quite a huge scale. One of the key members is a cultural anthropologist, Sandra Neeson, who Sass might know, and she's written she spent sort of 40 years studying indigenous craft and textile weaving in Indonesia. And I printed out a paragraph that but for the Batak people in Indonesia, the cloth is, it's sewn through with symbolism and community and this wealth tradition, spirituality, and it's gifted. I mean, when we're talking about new fashion systems, one of the new fashion systems that I would be interested in investigating is gifting, where we exchange pieces of clothing, not in a, here, try this for a Saturday night, but in a, this meant something to me, and now it's going to mean something to you. So for me, it's really about feeling the meaning of our clothing, like our best loved pieces and why we love them so much. And what Sandra Neeson says about the spiritual content of the pieces of cloth that women in the community often woven them together, kept them in their families, and then exchanged them. I think this is really the kind of reculturing that we need to look at, that will bring us into a deeper relationship with the earth, you know, and you know, also sadly with all the loss that we're going to be facing. But so that is, gifting would be a fashion system I would consider, and those are the reasons why. For a future.
I think that that it's lovely to hear that idea of gifting, because we just had a clothes swap today during our Fashion Revolution events, and it was really nice to see people's excitement about the swap and about receiving this garment that belonged to someone else. So that's it's a really lovely thing to see, and I think it was very refreshing also to see that today. I think we are having a very, very active chat, which was kind of what we were hoping for, because we really wanted this to be a conversation, a lively conversation. So I think I'm going to perhaps look at some of the questions. So we have a question for Beata. I'm really interested in the digital common space for digital fashion. Do you think you need to decouple digital fashion for a capitalist commercial model to not feel like it's business as usual and consumerism, and continue to fuel people's buying habits both online and off?
I would say I do not know, because I don't think I'm fully grasping the question. But I think if we think about commons and digital fashion, I think DAOs is quite interesting thing to explore. So I think there's, and there are DAOs that are dedicated just to buying things together, like Red DAO that buys things for a lot of money or invests money. But I think we will see emergence of very interesting decentralized autonomous organizations coming together to do other things, not necessarily connected to any kind of monetary financial exchanges. So I think that's very, very possible. So I would say that's interesting. And if I can just follow up about this kind of tactility and affect and reconnecting with textile, I think one of the researchers who's working around it in a very interesting way and looping it with digital fashion is Yuna Kim at Humboldt University in Berlin, because she's, to quote, looking into traditional Korean clothing, the hanbok, as an active matter, and how the East Asian ontology embedded in the garment can trigger divergent ways of how digital objects exist. So what with Yuna is doing, and I really admire her work, and I'm looking forward to seeing her final outcome of her PhD. But what I think is interesting to still remember that the digital matter can also, we're somewhere in between now, we're in the stage in between. So it's not like there's something that's digital and then there's my jacket. I'm still here with you, but I'm still wearing my kind of a bit too warm for occasion, jacket. And my back hurts a little bit. So I have all those tactile physical experiences. And I think thinking about the digital and in between us, it's also quite important. Obviously, the question of the sensory experience and tactility is a big question mark, but there are many bizarre developments in this direction and also some valuable ones. Like Yuna's, I can post if anyone is interested in her profile from Humboldt website. She's always been a lot of inspiration for me.
If I could add to that, Nora, not specifically about the digital space or Creative Commons, but about the content or the concept of decoupling success from consumption, because I think that runs across all industries, everything. I mean, we have to decouple it. There is no finite growth on a fine or infinite growth on a finite planet. It just isn't physically possible. We have to decouple all of our economies in the long term from a free market economy. It simply isn't a sustainable model for business. So And I think that's a really important point.
That's great. Thank you so much. And I think it really raises this idea as well, doesn't it? That, you know, I mean, we're here during Fashion Revolution Week because there are so many mistakes that have been made by the existing system. And so we want to reimagine them. But yeah, as we see kind of the big brands moving an extension, just another mode. So I think it's a fascinating thing to think about and so important to be thinking about it. I'm going to move on to another question because we've got quite a few questions in here. So I'd like to get through as many as we can. So we have a question from Morna Lang. Thank you for joining us, Morna. So she's asking here, there's a question for Belle. You were talking about how difficult it can be to be critical in the context of fashion journalism when it's a medium that depends so much on advertising revenue. Given your experience, as well as the network of contacts you must have in fashion journalism, how would you read the temperature of the room? Do you think other fashion editors are likely to follow suit in terms of leaving the industry and finding a different platform as you have?
Do you know what? So within the people, so a lot of the fashion journalists I know now who I really, really respect are writing in very, very different ways. And I actually, I don't know a lot of people now who write in a conventional, here's a new trend and buy these 5 handbags. Really, the fashion journalists that I really respect tend to be the ones looking at data behind the scenes. There is a whole new sort of strand of fashion journalism, which is all about looking at, well, data actually is a huge one. Really looking at the figures and the stats and setting goals and working, to change the industry from inside. I don't know how today actually you can write about a trend in an ordinary mag. I actually find fashion magazines today very difficult to pick up and look at. I find the iconography of fashion advertising quite shocking, considering what why do we need another beautiful woman wearing a fantastic top or carrying a leather handbag, leather, one of the most intensely produced. Do you know, it's so why do we need that now when we've just had this IPCC report going, we're at the end of days? So I find it very, very odd that, and I think it must be some kind of, it's a cognitive dissonance, it's a cognitive disconnect. And I don't blame anyone. I lived like that for many, many years, but it's just very difficult for me to see, and I don't really know, the journalists the fashion journalists I love at the moment. There's an incredible sustainability journalist, editor at Vogue Business who's fantastic. They're there. And I think actually the public will start to go, hang on, why do I need to be told I need another jacket? And I also sometimes ask people to think, what was their relationship to clothing when the pandemic first hit, for example? What were they thinking about their next purchase? And given that we might be entering a world in which, physical earthly problems are going to sort of speed up, there's a war in Ukraine. Why are we thinking about, I mean, I find it very difficult to think about my next purchase. Obviously you come in and out of from negative states to positive states, but the world is changing and it will change fast. So I think fashion journalism is on course to change. There is a lot of work being done in this area. Fashion communication, I think fashion advertising is being looked at. We've had a new green code coming in earlier this year, which will set the parameters for greenwashing. And so brands are going to have to think very, very carefully about what messages they put out about a small collection of recycled polyester t-shirts that they've just put out. And they're going to have to say, exactly why is this sustainable? Because it's definitely not part of the circular economy. So I think, like everything else, fashion journalism will change drastically. Yeah, some of it will be willing, and some of it will be, the fashion journalists themselves have taken that decision to move away from constantly promoting new product. Some of it will be, it'll be compelled by external circumstances. it's such a, I can't emphasize to you the urgency of what we're facing here. You know, there's a new report coming out saying we have a less than 10% in the most optimistic estimate to survive without facing catastrophic collapse. Where is fashion journalism in that? You know, where is fashion in that? And so these are the serious questions. 2 years ago, I wouldn't have been as open about the extent of the emergency as I am today, because I've been in a lot of talks when I've talked about the climate emergency and people have just shut down. We cannot afford to shut down. So that's my answer to it's a very long answer, but things are
but it's complicated, and I think even, you know, talking about the latest report, I mean, it hasn't even really been, let alone fashion journalists, it hasn't really even kind of been just in the general news, I think, enough, you know, considering as you said, the climate emergency. So yeah, it's really a collective responsibility, but I think, yeah, it's just great that we are all talking about it. You know, we love fashion, but we also really love our planet, so we need both. Sass, I wonder if there's anything you want to add, because I know obviously you've written a lot about fashion, and I wonder what you sort of feel around the sort of the conversation.
So much to talk about, really. I mean, to go back, I guess, to the tactile and the tangible, obviously that's something that resonates quite particularly with me, working with textiles and working with tradition and traditions around the world. And I am very much invested in the sustainment of those traditions. So, I mean, there's so much conversation here. I'm certainly not involved at all in the digital space. NFTs, etc., is out of my comfort zone to a degree. But you know, my focus has been and continues to be predominantly on alternative models. I don't think, you know, we can't continue to think about single interventions, and that's where sustainable and ethical fashion has focused for so long now, and hence the connection with greenwashing, that, you know, one intervention, whether it's, you know, using recycled materials, somehow offsets exponential growth, is just a ridiculous claim. And unfortunately, it's, you know, how you spin things is we've got very used to, in fashion, making very simple, catchy phrases out of sustainability statistics, which are often out of date, often completely inaccurate, not backed up by science or fact. But, you know, it's nice and easy to say it's the second most polluting industry in the world. Well, actually, it's not. And polluting of what exactly? Are we talking about air pollution, soil pollution, chemical use, you know, plastic, water pollution? What? We need to be far, far more specific and science-based with these, you know, statistics, which they barely qualify as statistics, honestly. And yet, you know, student after student, industry professional after industry professional consistently respouts those inaccurate figures, because it's nice and easy to say it takes 1,072 litres of water to produce a t-shirt. Well, what kind of t-shirt? Where in the world? What impact does it have on the people growing it? Is it in a water scarce region? Does it involve intensive irrigation? Is that including the water footprint of the use and wear? What happens to it at the end of life? These are far more complex conversations, and fashion has dumbed down and simplified these very complex realities far, far too much. So I think that, you know, it's obviously that makes it palatable. It makes it easy to digest, you know, and it sort of releases us from personal responsibility to a degree as well. You know, oh, I give my clothing to the Goodwill at the, you know, when I don't want it, but that doesn't actually stem overproduction or overconsumption, or deal with the fact that, you know, more than 35% of donated clothing is either destroyed or shipped off to somebody else who doesn't want it either, and it becomes a pollutant there. I think that there are some very easy outs for our conscience, and we have to dig far, far deeper than that.
Yeah, I think
Amazing. That was
right.
amazing. Thank you.
I feel like I mean, even someone is very kindly, but this is such a good panel, so I'm so glad, and you know, I'm really feeling so inspired by this conversation we're having this evening, even if we're really exploring actually how much more we need to know, how much more there is to transform. I think, you know, it's so important that we have these conversations, and bringing all your different perspectives together. You know, something that I think about a lot, obviously, I'm also a fashion designer now, a fashion educator. So I'm always thinking, as I'm thinking about all these issues that we see in the fashion industry, I'm always thinking, okay, but then what changes do we need to make within fashion education to help this push towards these new fashion systems that we want to see? So this is the next question I would like to ask all of our lovely panelists. You know, what are the different skills that you feel future fashion designers will need? And, you know, therefore, what should we be changing within fashion education to be able to reimagine these new fashion systems?
Yikes, that's a big one. If you don't mind, I'll start, because I mean, I know I'm not the only other educator on the panel, so I'm sure that everyone has some input, but it's something I've been railing against for a while, because, you know, traditionally, historically, there's been one route to success for a fashion designer, and it's been a route that is unsustainable in every single aspect, right from ideation, that traditionally doesn't consider other people as the holders of tradition or histories, and that, you know, we're taught as designers that the world's our oyster, it's full of beautiful people and beautiful places, and let's mine it and culturally appropriate it without having any knowledge or understanding of what we're appropriating and what the impact of that is. So I think the responsibilities of a designer are changing massively to being a knowledgeable researcher and understanding what we're using and how we're using it and what the ramifications for that are, and mitigating them. So design futuring effectively. And if we look at the way traditionally fashion education happens, right from not just the ideation stage, but the sketching stage, that 9.5 heads model, this single ideal of beauty that is exclusive by default, the idea that we make our samples in a size 0 when 99.9% of the population can't possibly ever aspire to having that body type, with from just a body type perspective, never mind a racial or a cultural perspective. You know, add on to that this system of trade shows and wholesaling and fashion shows. All of these systems were built for an industry that no longer exists. They don't have a point or a reason to be anymore. I mean, Fashion Week, every Fashion Week around the planet has been grappling with who are they and what are they doing now? When fashion shows are simulcast immediately on the internet, we're talking about a system that was set up for buyers and press that had a 3-month turnaround for printed fashion press, and at least a 3-month turnaround for buyers to get that product in the store. Yet now it's instantaneously available to consumers online, and tickets are sold at Fashion Week to the public. So we're still using these systems that no longer have a place or a point or a reason to be. And we're trying to tinker with them around the edges and sort of make them fit a new paradigm, when the reality is we need to scrap it all. We need to rethink everything. We can't just talk about single interventions because they don't make any difference. And I don't want to call, you know, brands, any particular brand out, but, you know, if we look at the recycling t-shirts by H&M, fantastic perspective, a good proof of concept in terms of technology for recycling. It's recycling one t-shirt at a time. How does that possibly offset the addition of hundreds of stores on an annual basis and all of the factors that are tied to that? or whether it's, you know, any number of other brands promotions with, you know, bio-grown leather or any number of other things, which are fabulous proofs of concept and technological innovations. But until all of these things are scaled up to use, not just as a PR and marketing undertaking, but actually as a production substitution, you know, they are negligible. And therein is the problem with talking about a lot of these things that brands spin it. You know, they talk about their great innovation. They don't talk about the actual offset of that impact on all of their other growth. So, yeah. Beginning to feel like I'm on a soapbox, sorry.
It's great. I'm enjoying the soapbox. Belle, what about you? What do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, what can I add to what Sas just said? I mean, absolutely hit the nail on the head. We really do have to challenge the culture of fashion. We can't send people into a fashion course thinking they're going to merge out of it the next Alexander McQueen, or you know, it's really right. I mean, neither can they also, I think, go in and go, I had this idea for this amazing dress. Now I'm just going to cut it out of these fabrics and it's going to be fantastic. It's almost like I'm asking for not a humility, but an understanding that we have to contribute now something to regeneration, restoration, resilience, adaptation. And these are how the courses need to be taught. How are you going to contribute to these things through the skills that you're going to learn here? If I mean, I kind of want to talk about the new systems that we could look at in fashion. And I think Sas in her introduction talked about fibre shed, and one of the new systems in fashion that, you know, I would like to see more of is fashion students going back to the land. You know, it would be great to see them going out with people from fibre shed, learning how to grow the crops that make the clothes. And in fact, a young designer actually just got in touch with me. She's got a new book out called Grow, Cook, Dye, Wear. And her idea is that you literally plant the seed, you grow the plant, you forage the plant, you boil it down to make dye, fabric dye. It's just an email that's come through, but it's literally, her name is Belle Jacobs, but just to give you an idea that this is happening, this is starting to happen. You know, people are starting to think, right, I want to be a fashion designer, I better get back to the land. Do you know what I mean? And I find that very, very exciting. As a new fashion system. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in fashion courses. I still get people coming up to me and saying, my fashion course isn't touching on these things yet. And I'm like, what? This is all you should be talking about in many ways. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the academic field.
Yeah, so I can maybe add my 5 cents. I think critical thinking and ethics, this is something that should be happening from the year 1 of a BA or the foundation year. This is very important. Whenever I had also classes about cognitive dissonance and what it is and how it works, and what is good design, what does it really mean with the first year students, both design and fashion, that was very fruitful. So these are the things that I did, and I think they really work, and I think they should be adopted widely. And the things that I think really are urgent is digital literacy, that students understand what is AI, what is blockchain, what is NFT, what does it mean to look at Instagram, what is an algorithm, what is the algorithmic gaze. I think these are very important things for them to be able to kind of deconstruct the flow of information that exists in. That's another thing. Then I think decolonial studies, I think this is very important for fashion education. And I think Erica is here today with us, and she's an excellent expert on that. So I would love to see more of that in fashion education, and also field work. And not only field work connected with kind of unveiling how things are done and traveling to places where fashion is being produced, not only reconnecting with the soil and the land and, you know, creating everything from the very, very early beginning, but also field work in the sense that you go to a shop and you examine garments, especially the ones that are objects of dreams, desires, and fantasies, to actually see and touch, and those clothes that we see that are presented and replicated by media, because very often the students, they never really seen the garment they cherish so much. They only cherish the image of it. So I think this kind of connection and doing field work in many different places that are associated with fashion industry even going to certain shops and looking at them from different perspective, I think that's very, very valuable. And I particularly personally appreciate many things that are happening at Deberlin, where I work, and also at Artes. I think these are there are many interesting things happening in those directions there.
Thank you. I think this is an area that we've started to explore also at the University of Portsmouth with sort of instigating experimentation with city textiles, for example. And there are also, I think, currently quite interesting projects that go from seed to garment that I think are really good examples of this. I know there's a project in Cape Verde. I was trying to remember its name, can't remember it now. That's exactly about working the land and following through the whole process and working within the local community. And there's also a project that I think is quite interesting. It's based in India, 1111, I think, that is also really focusing on exploring all of the process of making from seed to final garment. So I think these are, I just thought this could be a good way to start bringing this conversation to an end, just thinking about the positive development and the positive direction of this research and these new ways of thinking about fashion. I don't know if there is any final question that that anyone has written on the chat or that anyone wants to ask before we come into the close. Yes, Belle? That's okay.
So I just wanted to respond to a couple of things very quickly. The issue of decolonization, I think, is going to must become much more urgent. Again, going back to Sandra Neeson, the cultural anthropologist that I quoted before, she makes it clear that, you know, the Western fashion system has rendered all other clothing systems, I mean, some of them have disappeared because of the power of the Western fashion system. Some of the traditional artisans have been actually co-opted into sort of factories making clothes. It's an incredible waste of skill, but it's also an erasure of culture. So Sandra Neeson writes very, very powerfully about this, and I really urge everyone to sort of follow her writing. There is a question in the chat: how can we make nature fashionable? It's more than about making nature fashionable, isn't it? Really, it's about raising nature up to the place where she really needs to be. We touched upon it when we talked about decoupling success from economic growth. One of the key factors about that is redefining what success is, and I would say success is a planet that keeps on going. So you know, that's where we need to be heading. I think nature will become more than fashionable. I mean, I feel definitely within my community, and I sense that maybe you do as well, this urge to reconnect and to help it. And I think, on a positive note, we are in a time of incredible opportunity, you know, and opportunity to reconnect, but to sort of divest ourselves of things that aren't really that important, and to stop chasing after things that aren't really that important, and start focusing on good things, big things. Sorry, that's not very well put, but there you go.
Thank you so much, Belle. So Sass or Berta, do you have any last kind of positive notes that you want to highlight as we draw to a close this evening?
Oh, please. Sas, go ahead.
Sorry, I started and realized I was on mute. Apologies. I agree completely with Belle. I think you know, the challenges that we face also pose us an incredible opportunity, not just to tinker around the edges of fashion, but actually change systems, change values, change ways of working. And within that, you know, we must include decolonization of all of the content that we talk about. That's part and parcel. I mean, part of the problem when we talk about sustainability is too often it's just housed under environmentalism as opposed to social, anthropological, cultural, human impacts it has. But I think that we have incredible opportunity to affect real change. So I definitely agree with that point.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think there was many, many wonderful and powerful things that I would, to anyone who's interested in digital fashion, I would say to not avoid it, but tackle it with curiosity, with action, and not think about something that is moving us away or distancing, because I think it's just something that's going to happen anyway. So obviously we can reject it and we can say, this is not my cup of tea. But I think it's digitization of fashion is a massive, massive, very actively moving sphere. And I think it really needs our efforts, our action. And I think we really, really need to work a lot on it. So I would also encourage whoever feels at least a little bit interested to kind of, you know, be an active in this space and join it. Also as an activist, also as a scholar, also as a researcher, as a critical fashion practitioner. I think this is very, very urgent and very, very needed, because there are many unanswered questions and many questions that need to be asked in order for it to develop differently than fashion has been developing after globalization. So yeah, that would be my few cents.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. The chat has got lots of really interesting points, and I can see that there's been some other events shared in there, so have a look in there. And yeah, I think what's really inspiring is actually having these conversations, and I think getting together and exploring all the different things and all these different challenges. And I think for me, actually, what's really stayed, I mean, all of you have said so many fascinating things, but I think I really want to sort of sum up a little bit just with quoting Belle. Back to you, Belle. I love this idea of a fashion system being in service to the planet, because I think actually that covers kind of everything that we've touched on today, whether we're talking about kind of artisans that are obviously so connected to the land and the planet in terms of what they do, or if we're talking about this opposite realm of this new sort of realm of digital fashion, you know, how will that develop if we design it to be in service to the planet? I think that would be really wonderful. So yes, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Wonderful, wonderful guests. It was very, very exciting discussion. Really, I really think we should think about carrying on these discussions, because it really felt like something that we really need to talk about so much more often, isn't it? It's such an urgent matter. So yeah, thank you so much for all of your contributions and generous time.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you so much.
All of our guests that were so proactive in the chat. So
thank you,
everyone for coming.
So yeah, let's reimagine these fashion systems. All right, bye everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.